if you come to the same idea here. This vision that he has, right, where in the vision, God punishes those who sin, right, which is the last part of chapter 4 here. Where does this vision come from? Right? If you go to Acts chapter 5, you see with Ananias and Sapphira there. Thank you. I was going to say that, and I thought, was that the right? Anyway, Satan. It says there that Satan speaks to them, and then that's why they plot this way of lying to the church and selling their property and giving half and saying it was all. Right? And it was Satan whispering to them. So we can tell through the false theology that wherever this vision came from, it's not from God. Right? It's not from God. Okay? So we need to understand that. Okay, so let's see what Eliphaz's thinking and his theology really is. And let's kind of unpack this for the rest of class. So his theology and his reasoning process says, God is just in sending afflictions. Okay, let's test that ourselves. Is God just in sending afflictions to folks who may not be doing right? Check.
That's how he helps us to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we find examples of that in the Bible where God said, you're not doing right, I'm going to punish you? Oh, yeah, right? People, nations, families, right? Absolutely. And is God just in doing that? Absolutely. Okay, so the first of his three assumptions here is actually a really good one. God's okay to do that, right? He can send afflictions if he wants to, and it makes sense for him to do so, right? And this is why we want to talk about that. So God's sovereignty reigns. Okay, God's sovereignty reigns, right? And this is why I want to start the class this time in talking about God's sovereignty. Okay, let's go over to Romans chapter 9. We're going to look at Romans chapter 9 here just for a little bit when we're looking at this idea. I'm going to tell you right now, there may be a lot of questions about this. There may be a lot of people who think about this and like, I'm confused, right, when we talk about it. And I'm not sure I can answer your questions. I've never heard, to me, a satisfactory answer for this, right? It's like when I was going through engineering school, and we were doing some like mathematical equation, and then the answer came up infinity, right? And it was like, okay, the answer is infinity, and it really had something to do with all the rational numbers. And then I did another problem, and it came up, and the answer was infinity, and it had to do with all the irrational numbers. I'm like, wait a second. I don't understand that. Like, how can they both be infinity, and yet there's only like, for every rational number, all these rational numbers, there's like very few irrational numbers. And my teacher said, well, that infinity is more dense. And I'm like, I'm more dense for having heard that. I don't understand what you're saying. How can an infinity be more or less dense? It's infinity, right? You can't understand it, right? And that's kind of what's happening here as we kind of look at God's sovereignty, because when we look at this and we kind of compare this with free will, we kind of like, I don't understand it, right? Let me give you an example. So let's go here. Romans chapter 9, start in verse 8. Okay. And he's talking really here about Israel, right? And giving an example of Israel. He says, that is, it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are regarded as descendants. So he's giving the Gentiles hope, right? It's not just those who were of the physical lineage of Israel. Those who are his children are the ones that basically he has made these promises to, but it goes beyond the children of Israel. Okay? And that's his point here. It says, for this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah will have a son. And not only this, but there was Rebekah also, when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac. For though the twins were not yet born, and had not done anything good or bad, so that God's purpose according to his choice would stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls. Pause right there for a second. He chose one of them before they were born. Because it wasn't because of what they did, but because of who he is. Think about that. God's sovereignty. Okay. Who calls? It was said to her, the older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, and Esau I hated. What shall we say then? There is no injustice with God, is there? May it never be. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I raised you up, to demonstrate my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed throughout the whole earth. So then he has mercy on whom he desires, and he hardens whom he desires. You will say to me then, he's like, yeah, you're confused, and you don't get it, and you're going to ask me a question. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who resists his will, right? If God knows all this, and it's all up to him, then, how can he hold us accountable, right? This is what he's asking. On the contrary, who are you, O man, who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me like this? Will it? Or does not the potter have the right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use? What if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? And he did so to make known the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for his glory. That's really deep. Yes.
I think it has a lot, this is like predestination.
Yeah.
But I think it has a lot to do with, he still allows every man to make his own decisions and make his own choices. And God only really judges the heart. When you look at David, he judged his heart, even though he was not necessarily the boldest or the biggest or the best or whatever in man's eyes.
Yeah. And he says there in 2 Samuel, right, God looks at the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance, right? God looks at the heart. Right. Yeah, agreed, right? Yeah, I make a ton of mistakes, right? So you can see why people understand things in a different way, even though it's not right. We understand that we have free will, okay? We understand that we have free will. We get that, right? But here, when we continue to delve into this, really what this is saying is that in the end, God is sovereign, right? God can use us, put us in these positions. He can do anything he wants because he is the one who has created, he's the one who knows, and he's the one who has all these purposes in mind. And in the end, we are to but believe in him and to continue to understand the riches of his glory, right? That's really what it's saying here. In the end, it's my choice, even if God already knows the choice that I'm going to make. I'll give another example here in a minute. And again, I don't know if I can explain this well, right? It's a less dense infinity. I don't know, right? Yes. Okay, we're going to go there in just a minute.
They ask who sinned because I think that was their theology. Somebody, this guy's blind. Somebody sinned, his parents sinned, or he sinned, and then Jesus says, John 9.
Yep. Let's go there right now before we get some of the other, because I have that also in my notes here to talk a little bit about. So Phil's bringing up the man born blind, right? Because they had this theology like if you sin, right, you're punished, right? And in John chapter 9, it says this, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, his disciples, the ones he's been teaching, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or the parents, that he should have been born blind? Jesus answered, you're wrong. It is neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. He was given this so that this very moment would happen. Okay? we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said this, he spat upon the ground, and he made clay and of the spittle, and applied the clay to his eyes. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so he went away and washed and came back seeing.
The guy had a choice of either to go wash or not wash.
Absolutely. And he accepted the choice, and he took it, and guess what? He could see afterwards, right? But Jesus challenged their theology here, right? Their theology was this was a punishment, right, from God, and that's why he can't see. Jesus said, you don't understand. You don't get it. In this particular case, this person has this malady so that the power of God can be made manifest. Ooh. Is God okay to make somebody blind? He's the creator. He can do what he wants, right? We're reading this today and understand who God is and about his sovereignty through this. His purpose is eternal, right? Who are we to then question that, Miss Marilyn?
So I agree with all that. God is sovereign. But I really struggle with the fact, I have friends that their babies have died.
Yeah.
And Cortland has a friend, his cousin, 18-year-old, died of leukemia. And that's a faithful family. And I really hate it when I hear the term, well, that was God's will.
I agree with you.
And I wouldn't accept that as a mother who had lost a child. And I thought about this a lot, and I don't know, what. To me, I would never say God smited that child with leukemia. To me, I wouldn't say it, but I would say God allowed it to happen. And I don't know, you might think different, and I agree, we reap what we sow, and God does punish people, he disciplines us, so it's a really hard question. But one thing that I've kind of come to in Job chapter 2, when clearly in Job chapter 1 we see that it was Satan that caused this bad stuff to come, and God allowed it. And then in chapter 2, verse 3, Satan comes again, and God says, he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason.
Without cause.
So God takes responsibility for what Satan did because God's in control.
Yeah.
And he allowed it to happen. And that's how I deal with these things, that God can allow Satan to do things to us. Maybe as discipline, maybe as a test of our faith. But I really can't handle the thought of, God, well, I'm going to kill your child to see if you can handle it. Like, I feel like we got to be careful with our verbiage in this because, that can be a faith destroyer.
Yeah.
When you say God caused this.
Yeah. So when I said I agree, I agree that we need to continue to ever be understanding of how difficult this life can be. Right? How difficult, the loss of a child, untimely, like health problems, all the rest of it. That's why I covered the chapter previous the way I did, right? Is because absolutely. And I'm just going to tell you right now, even if there's some truth logically that that's the case, that is a heartless way to look at it. That's a heartless way to look at it. That's God's will. That doesn't show any mercy, and I don't think God wants people to deal with other folks in that particular way. Now, in the end, maybe does it serve God's purpose in some way?
Well, I think he allows a lot of bad things to happen.
Yeah.
He created everything good in the garden, and it was not his will that we sin or that diseases entered or this or that,
Yeah.
in my mind.
But he cursed the ground, right? And these are the questions that we struggle with through this life, right? And I totally agree. And that's why I always want to balance, that, right? God is a God of mercy. And even in the end, if it's the right thing to do, what you see in God's nature is that he's trying to then to still bring about his purposes in the ways that we can understand, right? And it doesn't mean it's not super difficult to grapple with. So people are really gathering up back there, but we got to kind of somewhat finish this. Go ahead, Brother Wayne.
I was going to say quickly in Romans 9, you read it right at the end, but Romans 9, you cannot says things that are very difficult to understand.
Yes.
And I'm so thankful Peter said that, because Peter's an apostle, and it gives me a lot of strength. But what that means is sometimes you got to read Paul's writing and be like, okay, and then Paul will kind of sum up things. And his summing up you can never miss, because if you miss that, you may miss all that he's trying to say. And in Romans 9, verse 22, he says, what if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? And I think that's key, because what it's saying is, what if the very Pharaoh that God knew, or it's the exact same wording with Judas, which I've heard so many times, Judas was this poor fellow picked to be the son of perdition, the son of doom. No, that's not it. You got it wrong. It's that the Pharaoh and Judas were going to be the way they were going to be, and God, through his mercy and patience, endured those sons of wrath, but then said, if you want to be sons of wrath, then I will make my name known by your disobedience. That is how you mix God's will with God's sovereignty. He looks front and back. He sees the sons of disobedience in their willful choices, and he says, I will make my name glorified by your poor decisions. And to go along with, Marilyn said it very well, and so have you, Randy, but just this balance of, I always address these things is the Garden of Eden, like she said, everything's been flipped on its head. This is in some degree, the Bible has said, the ruler of this world is Satan. Now, we know why Jesus says that. It's not that he's the ultimate ruler, but that many bow down to Satan in this world. This is a dark place. This is where things are not how they should be. And God is trying to correct them through our spirituality so that he can bring us to a place where all things are made right. But because of the consequence of sin, we really need to understand God's sovereignty. And because of the consequences of sin, one sin, this whole place was turned up on its head from what God wanted in our lives. And that's why children die. That's why things happen, because this has never been what God wanted for us, ever.
Yeah. I hate to leave the class here, but we've got so many folks in there. So we go ahead and come on in and be seated. We'll go ahead and leave it there. I want you to grapple with these questions, though, because they are super important, right? And this is where many times people attack Christians, on these big questions like this. But the answers are right here, right? The answers are right here as we continue to unpack them.